Limited quality you can trust.
Welcome back. You're viewing The Right Fit, and we're talking about safety with members.
How to help them, right? So palliative care, we want the patient to live longer and the patient to live better, right? You know, that is the watchwords we like to talk about, right, Nadeem?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to this live show, the Da'wah Show with Brother Mirza. For now, inshallah, we'll have some other hosts as we go along.
I am your host, Dr. Abdul Shahan Shah Ali Qasim, and this program Assalamu alaikum and good evening, my dear viewers. Welcome once again to another episode of your favorite program, Techno Live on IBN, right here. It's aired Thursday evenings from 8 to 9 p.m. This program is designed specifically based around technology, but sometimes we touch on different topics, and tonight is no different. Our topic tonight deals with screen time, and I'm quite sure that you might be asking yourself, what exactly do I mean? Well, almost everyone uses a mobile phone. Some of you use a tablet. Okay, so I just picked up a tablet here. And some of you use a laptop, which I have on my left-hand side as well. But the thing about it is that with everything, there's something called balance and there's something called moderation. Screen time can also be television or other interactive devices once it comes to an artificial screen. But do you know that based on recent studies, excess screen time has been proven to affect not only the young, the middle age, but also the elderly as well. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about screen time, interactive screens, how it works, how it affects us, how it affects learning in younger children and adults, as well as how it affects the average teenager. So our first topic, or the first part of what are we going to talk about, I'm going to show you a very little clip. That clip is going to talk about the use of phones in what is known as the Gen Z generation. And we're going to touch on a little bit of the recent generations after 2000 and you know, coming down to now. And what you will find is that a lot of people have been giving children smartphones to occupy their time or to keep them busy. In the earlier days, before there were touchscreen phones and you know, smartphones, what you find now is that sometimes parents would put the child in front of a television, put on a show, and then leave them to be babysit by the television while they do their chores or while they do other things, as the case may be. Nowadays, what's going to happen is that parents are giving children smartphones, tablets, interactive devices, and you will hear in the education circle, why don't we stop giving children school books and let us just give them electronic devices. That is a topic we're going to touch on as well. But because of the length of this topic, it's going to be a two-part series. So that means that today is going to be part 1, and next week, Thursday, God willing, will be part 2. So without me continuing, let's start off. Let's take a look at the first video that I have for you.
Imagine this. You're sitting at a dinner table. There's food, there's family, maybe some music in the background, and right across from you sits a teenager. Let's say your younger sibling, your cousin, or your neighbor's kid. They are staring at their phone, not rudely, just completely gone, in their own world. You try to make conversation. They give you one-word answer. Later that night, you see them laughing out loud at a 15-second video. And you think, why can they spend 4 hours scrolling but can't sit through a 20-minute conversation? Here's the thing. That question, most people ask it as a complaint. We're going to ask it as a real question. And the answer is genuinely fascinating. Because what's happening with this generation, people born between 1997 and 2012, the ones we call Generation Z, is not about laziness. It's not about being spoiled. There's something much deeper going on, and the research is only now starting to explain it properly. So today, we're going to talk about the psychology of Gen Z, what shaped them, what worries them, how they see the world, and what it actually means for all of us. Stick around, because by the end of this, you'll look at that kid on the phone very differently. Let's quickly set the scene before we go deeper. Generation Z, or Gen Z, are people born between roughly 1997 and 2012. That means today, they're anywhere from about 13 years old to their late 20s. They are the first generation to grow up with a smartphone in their pocket from the very beginning. Not as a new, exciting invention, but just as a normal part of life. Like how older generations grew up with a TV in the living room. For Gen Z, the phone was always just there. Think about a kid who was born in 2005. By the time they were in primary school, YouTube was already massive. By the time they hit middle school, the years when kids are trying to figure out who they are, Instagram, Snapchat, and TikTok were everywhere. Now compare that to someone born in 1985. They had a pretty normal offline childhood, discovered social media as a young adult, and had the choice to step away. Gen Z never had that choice. The online world was just always part of growing up. And that difference, while as small as it sounds, changes almost everything about how this generation thinks, feels, and behaves. Here's where it gets really interesting and a little uncomfortable. Social researcher Jonathan Haidt spent years studying what happened to teenagers around the world, starting around 2012, and he noticed something alarming. Rates of depression, anxiety, and self-harm among young people started rising sharply, not just in one country, everywhere. His conclusion was something he calls the Great Rewiring of Childhood. The idea that during a very specific window, roughly 2010 to 2015. Two things happened at the same time, and together they changed a generation. The first thing, kids stopped playing outside. In previous decades, kids would spend hours after school just outside, riding bikes, making up games, getting into small bits of trouble. That kind of unstructured, unsupervised play is actually really important for growing up. It teaches you how to handle conflict, how to fail, how to get back up. The empty park. Think about the parks in your city or town. 20 years ago, they were full of kids after school. Today, many of them are quiet. Kids are at home on their devices. It's not that parents got stricter, it's that screens became more exciting than a park bench. The second thing, the internet became a childhood. At the exact same time that kids stopped roaming freely outside, they were handed smartphones and social media accounts. And unlike the outdoor world, this online world was built by companies whose only goal was to keep users engaged as long as possible. The app that knows you. Have you ever noticed how your phone's video feed seems to know exactly what mood you're in? That's not an accident. Apps like TikTok use clever systems that study your behavior and feed you content that keeps you watching. It works on adults. Imagine what it does to a 12-year-old. The result? A generation that lost real-world experience right as they were being pulled into a high-speed, never-ending virtual one. And the numbers tell the story clearly. Cases of serious anxiety among teenage girls nearly doubled between 2010 and 2020. Hospital visits for self-harm among 10 to 14-year-olds tripled in the US. Similar patterns appeared in the UK, Canada, Australia, and parts of Europe, all at roughly the same time. This wasn't a coincidence, it was a consequence. Now here's what I really want you to understand. This isn't just abstract information. You can see the effects in everyday situations. Let me break down 4 specific ways this shows up, and I promise, as I say each one, you'll think of someone you know. 1. They can't sit still with their thoughts. Ask any Gen Zer what they do when they're bored. The answer is almost always pick up the phone. Not because they're lazy, maybe, but because they've been trained very effectively to need something stimulating every few seconds. Watch a group of people waiting somewhere, a bus stop, a queue at a shop. Older adults might look around, chat with strangers, or just stand quietly. Most Gen Zers will have their phone out within 30 seconds. The discomfort of doing nothing feels almost unbearable to them because their brains learn to expect constant input. Research shows the average Gen Z teen receives around 190 phone notifications every single day. That's one alert roughly every 5 minutes during waking hours. Over time, that trains the brain to expect interruption. Sitting quietly starts to feel wrong. 2. They sleep less than any generation before them. And this one really matters because bad sleep makes everything worse. Your mood, your focus, your patience, your ability to handle stress. You've probably done this yourself at some point. Gone to bed with your phone, told yourself just 5 more minutes, and then looked up to find it's been 2 hours. For Gen Z, this isn't an occasional thing, it's nightly. Many teenagers report falling asleep past midnight and waking up exhausted for school. Studies consistently show that Gen Z sleeps significantly less than previous generations did at the same age. And the phone in the bedroom is the main reason. 3. Social media became their mirror, and it's a distorted one. Here's one that's really important to understand. Social media is built on comparison. You post, you get likes, you see how many other people got. You compare your photos to others. You compare your life to a highlight reel of everyone else's best moment. Imagine posting a photo and checking every few minutes to see how many people liked it, or posting something and getting far fewer likes than your friend did. For many teens, this isn't just a small disappointment. It hits the same emotional area as being left out in real life. Because for them, online life is real life. Research from McKinsey shows that Gen Z is 1.6 to 1.8 times more likely than millennials, the generation just before them, to feel that their mental health is poor, and the social comparison happening online every day is one of the biggest contributing factors. 4. They are more lonely than people expect. This one surprises people. How can a generation that is constantly connected feel lonely? But connection online and genuine closeness are not the same thing. 500 followers, no one to call. You might know someone who has hundreds of followers online, people watching their stories, reacting to their posts, but ask them, who would you call at 2 a.m. if something was really wrong? For a lot of Gen Z, that list is very short. They have audiences. They're short on friends. Data shows that the average Gen Z teenager spends about 67 minutes per day in actual face-to-face time with friends, down from 122 minutes just 10 years ago. The time didn't disappear. It moved online, but something got lost in the move. Let's look at the full picture of Gen Z's mental health, because the data is something you need to sit with for a moment. According to McKinsey's research, more than half of young adults aged 18 to 24 have already been diagnosed or treated for a mental health condition. More than half. And when Gallup tracked the same age group over time, they found that the share of young people who say their mental health is excellent has dropped from over 50% to just 15% in about a decade. Deloitte's 2024 global survey found that only about half of Gen Z rate their overall mental health as good. LIMRA, which studies workplace well-being, found that 91% of Gen Z employees say they experience some form of mental health difficulty regularly. The office colleague. Think of a young colleague at work, maybe early 20s. On the surface, they seem fine. They're productive. They joke around. They show up. But in private, many are managing anxiety that would have been considered clinical a generation ago. They've normalized struggling, which is both impressive and heartbreaking at the same time. Now, an important thing to say here. This does not mean every single Gen Z person is broken or in crisis. Most are not. But what the data is telling us is that this generation, on average, is carrying a heavier emotional weight than any we've studied before. And a lot of them are carrying it quietly. And here's the part that really sticks with me. They are less likely to ask for help. Despite being the most open generation about discussing mental health publicly, many still don't seek support privately. Maybe because it feels like everyone else is struggling too. Maybe because they don't know where to start. Here's where Gen Z gets really interesting, and because for all their struggles, there's something quite remarkable about how they understand themselves. This generation is more honest about their inner life than any before them. They talk about their anxiety, their identity, their doubts, in ways that older generations simply didn't. Whether that's in therapy, in YouTube videos, in conversation with friends, or just in the way they speak. Have you noticed how young people today have a whole language for emotional experiences? Words like triggered, boundaries, gaslighting, burnout. These weren't common conversation topics 20 years ago. Gen Z didn't invent these concepts, but they made them everyday language. That's actually a sign of emotional awareness. They also think about identity very differently. Research from Gallup shows that over 22% of Gen Z in the US identify as LGBTQ+, compared to less than 10% of millennials and under 3% of baby boomers. Whether you read that as a cultural shift, greater openness, or something else entirely, it tells you that this generation is less willing to squeeze themselves into boxes that don't fit. Deloitte's research shows that 77% of Gen Z will actually turn down a job offer if the company's values don't match their own. That's not arrogance. That's a generation that takes who they are seriously. There's a growing trend of young content creators, like people who built huge audiences, quitting social media because it was making them miserable. They had the followers, the views, the income, and they still walked away. That kind of self-awareness is actually very Gen Z. They are searching, genuinely searching, for something that feels real in a world that keeps offering them filtered, curated, and performed versions of life. If you manage, teach, or work alongside Gen Z, this section is for you, because there's a very specific kind of frustration that comes with this generation in professional settings, and it almost always comes from a mismatch of expectations. You've probably seen this. A fresh graduate joins a team. They're smart, they're capable, and in the first week they're excited. Then they realize there are no regular check-ins, no real feedback, and their manager expects them to just figure it out. Within 3 months, they've mentally checked out. By 6 months, they've handed in their notice. That's not just a one-off story. Deloitte found that 59% of Gen Z plan to leave their current job within 2 years, and the number one reason isn't salary. It's feeling like the work doesn't mean anything, or that nobody actually cares about their growth. On the other hand, 74% of managers in a recent survey say Gen Z is the most challenging generation they've managed. The most common complaints? Hard to motivate, easily distracted, struggle with pressure. Here's my honest take on that. Those complaints aren't wrong, but they're also missing something. A Gen Zer who seems unmotivated is often someone who grew up being rewarded with instant feedback, likes, views, comments, and is now in an environment where good work might not be noticed for months. That's a real adjustment. A Gen Zer who's distracted has a brain that's been trained since childhood to expect a new notification every 5 minutes. That doesn't just switch off when you give them a desk job. Most older workplaces give feedback once a year, in a formal review. Gen Z grew up in environments that gave feedback constantly and immediately. Moving from that to annual reviews feels like going from a fast conversation to waiting a whole year for a reply. Of course there's friction. Interestingly, and this surprises people, 58% of Gen Z say they actually prefer face-to-face communication at work more than any other channel. They want real connection. They just haven't always been given the right conditions for it. We've talked a lot about what's hard for Gen Z, and it is hard, but I want to spend a moment on something equally true, because it's easy to write off an entire generation based on the struggles and miss what's actually remarkable about them. Gen Z is the most aware generation about the world's problems. Climate change, inequality, mental health, they didn't just inherit these issues. They grew up knowing about them, talking about them, and in many cases building their entire identity around trying to fix them. The student climate marches. Remember when millions of young people marched in cities around the world in 2019, demanding action on climate? That was largely Gen Z, not waiting for permission, not waiting until they had power, just showing up and making noise because they genuinely felt like it was their future at stake. They also changed the conversation around mental health for everyone, because Gen Z talks openly about therapy, about burnout, about needing rest. Older generations are now more comfortable doing the same. Their openness has had a ripple effect. Deloitte's research shows that 90% of Gen Z say working for a company that actually cares about something is more important than just the paycheck. That's not entitlement. That's a generation that grew up watching others burn out chasing money and status and decided that's not what they want. A few years ago, the idea of quiet quitting went viral. The idea of just doing your job and no more. People treated it like Gen Z being lazy, but many researchers read it differently, as a generation refusing to let their entire identity be their job, which, honestly, is something more generations probably should have done. The ones who've done the inner work, gone to therapy, built real friendships, found causes they care about, are genuinely some of the most emotionally aware, purpose-driven young people you'll ever meet. They are not a lost generation. They are a generation that got lost, and many of them are actively finding their way back. So, let's come back to that dinner table, the teenager on their phone, the one-word answers, the 4 hours of scrolling. Now you know a little more about why. Not to excuse everything, not to say nothing needs to change, but just to understand, because understanding is always the starting point. If you're a Gen Zer watching this, you didn't choose the world you grew up in. The phones, the apps, the pressure, that was handed to you before you even knew what to do with it. That is genuinely unfair, but the path forward, putting the phone down, making real connections, asking for help when you need it, that part does belong to you. If you're a parent, a teacher, a manager, the research is telling you something clear. This generation doesn't need to be fixed. They need to be understood. They need real conversations, real feedback, and real time, not just a screen pointed at them. And if you're somewhere in the middle, a millennial, a Gen X, even a boomer watching out of curiosity, here's the uncomfortable thought I'll leave you with. The world that shaped Gen Z didn't come from nowhere. It was built by all of us together. The apps were made by people. The business models were approved by people. The phones were put in children's hands by people. And that means the responsibility for what comes next also belongs to all of us. Gen Z didn't break. They bent. Under more pressure, more noise, and more unreality than any generation before them. And the fact that so many of them are still standing, still questioning, still searching for something real, honestly, that's not anxiety. That's
Right, so that video jogs the average person's mind. And I'm quite sure that this video was so relevant to 99% of my viewers out there that it was important that I show you it. In addition to that, addressing the fact that when you go to the bank, you go to the mall, you go to the dinner table, you go to a public space, not only adults, not only teenagers, but children are running around with their phones. You know, sometimes you forget your phone, you feel as though you leave something essential at home. You go somewhere, you don't have internet, or worse yet, your battery run dead. That's like you want to fall down. The idea about it is that when we think of our phones long ago, a phone was just to make a call, hello, bye, and that's it, you put it away. But because of the technology, and as I said, in this program, we always talk about the pluses, the minuses, and we try to find a balance in terms of what it is all about. When we start and continue, you and I, giving children these gadgets, not to make a call, but to download an app, to play a game, to go on the internet, to watch a video on YouTube, what's happening is that, yes, we are doing certain things, we are stimulating their brain. But do you know there are pluses and minuses, there are pros and cons and everything that we do. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to address the fact that what happens when we give these screens to children, what happens? What does it happen? Is it a good thing, a bad thing? Is it a balance? What is it? Let's take a look.
Screen time. It's a very common topic in today's world. When you think of all the gadgets that have screens, it makes sense why there would be some concerns. TVs, laptops, tablets, there are even screens in our cars. But does too much screen time really affect our kids? Make the most of your screen time and subscribe to Bestie and click the notification bell too. Help support our channel by watching this video all the way until the end. Controlling screen time can be tricky because screens are everywhere. According to some big health organizations, we should probably be paying more attention to the effect screen time can have on our kids, especially the little ones under the age of 5. Early childhood is a period of rapid development and a time when a family's lifestyle patterns can be adapted to boost health gains. Thanks, Doc. So why should we adapt our lifestyle to reduce screen time when it comes to our kids? Here are some reasons why. Screen time means less green time. So the first reason is kind of a no-brainer, but sitting in front of a screen means kids are not paying attention to the world around them. Nature plays a big role in how we deal with everyday life. Have you ever felt stressed out, went for a walk along your favorite beach, and instantly felt better? It's like that. When little ones interact with nature, it's been proven to help lower stress, reduce aggression, and can help them focus later on. Which means the more time in front of the screen, the less time they get to experience those natural mood enhancers and make good habits of playing outside. In fact, experts go on to say that screen time can do the exact opposite of what nature does when it comes to aggressive behavior and focus. Where nature calms and relaxes, too much screen time can increase stress levels and create a feedback loop of depression. Not only that, but when a child's ability to focus is thrown off, they can't deal with the world around them properly, which might cause them to lash out more often. There have been studies that show screen time takes up a large amount of a child's mental energy. One fast and easy way of restoring that lost energy is to become angry, which will eventually turn into their way of coping. Becoming angry will give them the boost of mental energy that they crave when they need it. In other words, you can expect more meltdowns more often. Too much screen time can make kids sad. When kids are young, their brains are still developing, and studies tell us that the exposure to screens can, and probably will, have a negative effect. Mainly when it comes to video games. This targets kids who are most likely between the ages of 8 and 18 and have regular exposure to screens, which is about 7 or so hours a day. The main side effects of too much screen time when it comes to addiction and gaming are reported as emotion processing, decision-making, cognitive control, and the ability to focus one's attention. Not only that, but games flood the brain with the feel-good chemical known as dopamine. The problem with all the dopamine on a regular basis is that the reward pathways that accept this chemical and make us feel good get tired and worn out way faster than they should. This means that the kids affected will have to work a lot harder to feel happy. Not to mention dopamine helps with motivation and focus. Screen time reduces dream time. We're sure at one point or another you've heard about how your phone can be detrimental when it comes to sleeping. Especially if you're glued to Instagram right up until you go to bed. Well, the same concept can be applied to the little ones too. Just 2 hours on your device at full brightness can suppress the hormone that helps you fall asleep, known as melatonin. Melatonin is what makes you feel sleepy, and if you don't feel sleepy, you're probably not going to fall asleep. Chronic disruption of your circadian rhythm, your body's natural sleep and awake cycle, can cause some pretty serious health concerns. The other problem is if this cycle is disrupted, even if you do get to sleep, it won't be the deep restorative sleep that you need to feel refreshed the next day. We all know how kids can get when they're tired, and who wants that to be the norm? For more on what actually happens to your body when you fall asleep, check out our video. This is what happens to your body when you go to sleep. Okay, so all of those things are kinda scary. So what can you do to help your family stay healthy in this giant tech world that we live in? Well, for starters, there are some guidelines. For infants that are less than a year of age, you should be active throughout the day with things like play and tummy time when they're awake. They shouldn't be strapped into a seat when they're awake for longer than an hour each day. This means things like strollers, high chairs, or being strapped to someone. When the baby is still, it's a good idea to read to them too. After all, bedtime stories are the best. This is pretty much the same for kids under the age of 4, although they should be active for at least 3 hours a day. This includes things like playing, running, walking, basically anything that gets them up and moving. Kids who are between the ages of 2 and 4 need a bit less sleep than an infant, but those are what is recommended when it comes to activity and staying still. Okay, so we know that little ones shouldn't be still for more than an hour each day. When it comes to screen time, kids tend to be pretty still. This leads us to believe that kids should have no more than an hour of screen time each day. It's also recommended that besides things like video chatting to grandparents and friends, you should put in place some screen time rules. For infants under the age of 24 months, it's recommended that they don't get any screen time besides video calls like we just mentioned. And for kids ages 2 to 5, an hour of screen time a day is plenty. You should also monitor what your kids are looking at and make sure the things they're watching are age appropriate and are more on the educational side of things, and stuff that limits the amount of advertising. However, everyone's household is different, and really, it's up to you to decide what works and what doesn't. We're just giving you the facts. You can build your schedule around that. We live in a digital era, and understanding what they see on screen isn't always true or real is extremely important. This is called digital literacy, and it's basically critical thinking when applied to the internet. Of course, this is directed at kids who are a little older, but they'll probably ask questions, and you want to make sure that you have the proper tools to understand what they're seeing. Remember, there are lots of parental tools that you can use to help filter content you don't want your kids to see, too. Have you ever taken some time to unplug? Lots of people have a day where they try not to use any technology, and some claim it works wonders for clearing the mind. Again, to each their own, but when your kids get older, scheduling a day to unplug and spend time outside or do something together might not be a bad idea. You can set phone curfews, turn your TV off after a certain hour, or install some apps that limit the amount of screen time available on a particular device. Again, every household is different, and it might take a little time to figure out what works for you and your family. Screens are everywhere and are a part of our daily lives. But like we always say here at Bestie, everything in moderation.
Right, so you heard that last statement, everything in moderation. In Islam, as you know, this is an Islamic station, we always believe a little bit of everything is good, but not in excess. Moderation, that is the key. And you can use your tablets, you can use your phones, you can use your laptops, you can look at television, but the idea about it is that you create a balance in terms of a little bit of everything is fine. But too much of one thing, that's when you become extreme or in excess, and that's when you have issues. Now, do you know that based on research that is being done and that has been done and has been proven, what I'm going to explain to you now is that screen time, excess screen time, interactive screen time, have a way it actually affects the brain of a human being, especially children. Our next clip I'm going to show you will actually explain to you scientifically what happens when children becomes too dependent on their gadgets or their phones or the computers, or in most cases, the tablets. Let's take a look.
Right now, while your child is on that screen, their brain is being physically restructured, and most parents have absolutely no idea it's happening. Screen time isn't just entertainment. It's actively rewiring how your child focuses, how they feel, and how their brain is being built every single session. We're going to show you exactly what's happening inside that brain and why the biggest signs have been hiding in plain sight. By the end of this, you'll recognize things you've already been seeing, and you'll know exactly what to do. That's what we're going to change today. Imagine it's 5:30 in the evening. Dinner isn't ready, you're running on fumes, and your child is somewhere in the house, quiet, completely absorbed in whatever's on that screen. And honestly, that's a relief. Most parents use screens exactly like this, as a tool, as a breather, as 20 minutes of peace to just function. There's no judgment here, none. But then comes the moment. The screen goes off, and suddenly you're not dealing with a calm child anymore. You're dealing with tears, bargaining, just one more video. A meltdown that seems completely out of proportion to what just happened. And you've probably thought, is this just their age, their personality? Is this normal? Here's the thing. The behavior is normal, in the sense that millions of children do it, but the reason behind it goes much deeper than most parents realize, because what looks like a tantrum about a tablet is actually something happening inside the brain itself. Think of two kids. Both are 5 years old. One spends 3 hours a day on fast-paced video content, short clips, autoplay, constant novelty. The other plays outside, reads, gets genuinely bored sometimes. Fast forward a few years. Their brains will literally look different. Not figuratively, literally, structurally different. Scientists can see it on a scan. That's because of something called neuroplasticity. Your child's brain isn't a fixed object. It's more like wet cement, especially in these early years. It's forming connections at a staggering pace, pruning the ones it doesn't use, reinforcing the ones it does. And eventually that cement starts to set. Repetition becomes wiring. So whatever your child does repeatedly, their brain builds around. And right now, screens are doing the training. Sounds simple enough, until you understand exactly what kind of training is happening and what it's doing to the reward system. Let's start with dopamine. Most people call it the pleasure chemical, but that's not quite right. Dopamine isn't about pleasure, it's about anticipation, the drive to seek, the pull toward reward. Every time something surprising or exciting happens, your brain releases a hit of dopamine. It's saying, that was good, do it again, find more of that. Now think about what well-designed children's content actually does. Fast cuts, bright colors, constant novelty, a new joke every 10 seconds. Autoplay that removes even the friction of choosing what to watch next. Every single one of those elements is a dopamine trigger. You've probably seen the moment. Your child finishes a video, and immediately, before the next one even starts, their face drops, like a light went off. The energy just leaves. That's not attitude. That's their brain's dopamine levels dropping below their normal baseline. It's a dopamine crash. And here's why that matters so much. Children's brains are significantly more sensitive to dopamine than adult brains. Research suggests the reward systems in developing brains respond more intensely and take longer to reset. So, every session with fast-paced screen content is essentially a dopamine workout. The brain gets very good at expecting frequent, intense rewards. And then real life shows up, where rewards are slower, where you have to wait for the punchline, where things are sometimes just boring. Real life cannot compete with something that is engineered to always be exciting. The brain, having adapted to expect constant stimulation, starts treating ordinary experiences as dull, unworthy of attention. But this doesn't stop at what your child enjoys, because what's happening to the reward system? It's doing the exact same thing to their ability to focus. You've probably noticed it. You ask your child to sit with a book, a real one, where the pictures don't move, and within a minute, they're fidgeting. Done. Or think about homework. They sit down, pencil in hand, and within 2 minutes, they need a snack, a break, to check something. Anything but the thing in front of them. Parents often chalk this up to personality. He's always been high energy. She just can't sit still. But here's what the research is actually showing us. Sustained attention is a skill. And like all skills, it only develops through practice. Fast-paced screen content eliminates that practice entirely. Fast cuts and sudden noises actually hijack your child's orienting reflex, a biological survival instinct meant to spot sudden danger. The screen is forcing their attention, which means there's no moment of sustained focus required, because the screen never actually demands it. Studies comparing children's media exposure with their ability to focus on slower, more demanding tasks have found a consistent pattern. Higher exposure to rapid-fire content correlates with greater difficulty maintaining attention when it matters most. In school, in reading, in problem-solving. The exact places where attention determines long-term success. It's not that your child is broken. Their brain has simply been trained by high-speed content to expect constant change, and slow things now feel neurologically uncomfortable. And here's where it gets personal. Because the next thing screens are changing, you've seen it, every parent has. It's the explosion that happens the moment you turn the screen off. So let's go back to that moment. The screen goes off, and the explosion follows. What's actually happening there? When a child is absorbed in a screen, especially fast-paced, highly stimulating content, their nervous system is being regulated by the device. The stimulation is doing emotional work for them, keeping them calm, keeping them engaged. In a very real sense, the device is managing their emotional state. But it isn't actually calming them down. It acts like a digital anesthetic. It captivates their attention so completely that they simply tune out their physical body and their big feelings. They aren't regulated. They are just deeply distracted. So when the device is removed, it's not just that something fun went away. It's that the thing managing their emotional equilibrium was suddenly taken away. The brain reacts the way it would to any sudden loss of regulation. Distress, dysregulation, overwhelm. What looks from the outside like a tantrum is, on the inside, closer to withdrawal from stimulation. And here's why this matters long-term. Emotional regulation, the ability to manage your own feelings, to self-soothe, to recover from frustration without falling apart, is one of the most critical skills a child can build. It underpins academic resilience, friendships, mental health, but it only develops through practice, through sitting with uncomfortable feelings and learning, gradually, to move through them. When screens consistently step in as the emotional regulator, that practice doesn't happen. The brain outsources the job instead of building the capacity itself. This isn't about blame. This is about understanding what's actually happening beneath the surface, so you can make choices that help. But the most surprising finding, the one researchers are only beginning to fully grasp, isn't about behavior at all. It's about the architecture of the brain itself. Researchers have now conducted multiple large-scale studies looking at the brains of children with different levels of screen exposure. Some of the most significant findings come from the Adolescent Brain Cognitive Development Study. the largest long-term brain development study ever conducted in the United States, tracking more than 11,000 children. 11,000 kids. And what researchers saw in their brain scans was a measurable structural change. Specifically, the outer layer of the brain, which processes information, was maturing and thinning out prematurely. While science is still working to definitively prove if screen time causes this shift or just strongly correlates with it, the pattern is undeniable. These are the parts of the brain your child is going to rely on. For school, for relationships, for navigating their entire life. It's not catastrophic, but it's real. And it's happening during the exact years when none of it can be redone. Because here's the timing that matters. The period between birth and age 12 is arguably the most critical window in human brain development. The prefrontal cortex, the region governing decision-making, focus, emotional control, long-term thinking, doesn't fully mature until the mid-20s. But its foundations are being laid right now. At the exact stage when the brain is building its most important infrastructure, it's being shaped by a form of stimulation that evolution never prepared it for. Artificial, relentless, instant. And it doesn't stop when the screen turns off. The blue light from these devices suppresses melatonin, quietly delaying your child's sleep. Because a child's brain does its most critical building, pruning, and emotional resetting, including moving everything they learned that day into long-term memory. While they sleep, heavy screen use impacts their brain twice, once during the day, and again by stealing the recovery they need at night. So what does all of this actually look like at home? The attention that drifts mid-sentence, like the emotions that crash when a screen goes off, the boredom that feels completely unbearable. Those aren't personality quirks, they're visible signs of a brain being trained in real time. And to really understand the full cost, we need to talk about something that rarely comes up in these conversations. Not what screens do, but what they quietly replace. Do you remember being bored as a kid? Like genuinely, nothing to do, summer afternoon bored? Where you'd stare at the ceiling, wander around the house, complain that there was nothing to do. Until eventually, out of sheer necessity, you invented something. That boredom had a job. It was building something inside you. And most children today never get the chance to feel it. Screens don't just occupy time, they fill silence. And that silence, it had a purpose. Boredom is the seedbed of imagination. Neuroscientists actually have a name for this. It activates what's called the default mode network. Think of it as the brain's background imagination engine, and it only powers on when we are doing absolutely nothing. When a child has nothing to reach for, that engine kicks in, and the brain has to generate its own stimulation. That's where creativity is born, where children invent games, build worlds, solve made-up problems. That internal work is irreplaceable, and screens eliminate the conditions for it to happen. Then there's real social interaction. The awkward, slow, sometimes frustrating process of playing with other children, negotiating, reading faces, navigating conflict without a mute button or a reset. These moments build the neural pathways for empathy, communication, and social intelligence. They don't transfer from a screen, and slow, sustained play, blocks, drawing, building, pretending, the kind where nothing explodes and nothing levels up. This is where deep thinking develops, patience, spatial reasoning, the ability to stay with something hard. It's not just what screens do, it's what they quietly take away. Now, before we go any further, I want to be completely honest with you about something. Not all screen time is equal. That matters. And the research actually backs it up. A child video calling a grandparent using a screen to genuinely connect is having a social experience that serves development. A child watching a slow narrative story with a beginning, middle, and end is experiencing something meaningfully different from rapid-fire short-form clips. Educational content that pauses, asks questions, invites the child to respond, that engages the brain in a participatory way. That's not the same as passive consumption. The research isn't saying screens are the enemy, it's saying context matters, content matters, pace matters, and the younger the child, the more all of it matters. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends avoiding screens for children under 18 months, except for video calls. From 18 to 24 months, if you introduce screens, they advise choosing high-quality programming and watching it with your child. And for ages 2 to 5, they recommend limiting use to 1 hour a day. But beyond the numbers, what matters most is the why behind your choices. This isn't about removing screens from your child's life. It's about understanding them, So you're choosing intentionally instead of defaulting automatically. And that leads us to the part that actually changes things. What you can do starting today. So here's what you actually do with all of this. 5 things, practical, realistic, and none of them require turning your household upside down. First, notice the pace of what your child is watching. Not just the content, but the speed of it. Fast-cutting, rapidly changing content is significantly more stimulating than slow narrative storytelling. Choosing a slower-paced show over a rapid one, even occasionally, shifts what kind of training the brain receives. Second, create transitions, not cutoffs. One of the biggest triggers for post-screen meltdowns is abruptness. Instead of screen off now, try a 5-minute warning. Then a 2-minute warning. Then a clear next activity waiting. The brain needs a runway to land, give it one. Third, protect boredom. This is counterintuitive, but one of the most powerful things you can do for your child's developing brain is to not fill every quiet moment. Resist the reflex to hand over the device the second they say, "I'm bored." That discomfort is productive. Let it breathe. Fourth, co-view when you can. Watching alongside your child and talking about what you're seeing, asking questions, making connections, transforms passive screen time into an active experience. You become the bridge between the screen and the real world. And fifth, replace, don't just remove. When you reduce screen time, have something ready. A sensory bin, building blocks, an outdoor prompt. The goal isn't deprivation. It's redirection toward the kinds of experiences that give the developing brain what it actually needs. None of these require a dramatic overhaul. They're small, consistent shifts. But small, consistent shifts are exactly what reshapes a developing brain. We started today by asking what screen time is actually doing to your child's brain. And the answer goes deeper than most parents ever get to hear. It's shaping reward pathways. It's training attention. It's affecting emotional regulation. And it's influencing the structural development of the brain at its most critical window. Think about what you've seen lately. The fidgeting at the dinner table, the meltdown over a tablet, the boredom that seemed impossible to satisfy, the attention that slipped away mid-sentence. Those weren't random behaviors. You were watching a brain being trained in real time, and now you know what you're actually looking at. You are not powerless in this. You never were. The same brain that's been shaped this way can be guided in a new direction. Brains that have been trained one way respond to change, especially when the adults around them are paying attention. And you're here. You're paying attention. That already makes a difference. Because screen time isn't just something your child uses, it's something that is shaping who they become.
Right, so you just saw that it affects the brain. So nothing is wrong with screen time. Nothing is wrong with interactive screen time in moderation. But when you're talking about giving a child a device to use for an excessive amount of time for the entire day, you have a problem. Now, one of the questions that I wanted to address tonight, but I know we might not have enough time to do that, is someone posed to me a question: should we not eliminate standard textbooks in the book bag and replace it with a tablet? And I responded to them no, and they wanted to know why. Now, there's a lot of reasons why, but I'm not going to get into all those reasons tonight. What I'm going to talk about a little bit quickly is what interactive use of screens and how researchers are looking at what's happening, because the reason why we have to do that, you will understand when we go to the next step why I'm going to say what I'm going to say. So let's take a look at our next video, interactive screen time.
This is a special 10 News Plus program. We've seen the meltdowns when kids are pried away from screens, but frightening new data shows those devices could be causing deeper problems. Tonight, the experts call to radically change the rules.
I'm sorry, bud, you can't have an iPad. Okay, let's eat.
As parents, we already know it. Excessive screen time, excessive emotion. But what if it's much worse than that?
Can you see the screen all right? Yeah.
This is 5-year-old Rose. She was one of 60 kids to undergo an exhaustive study in the US, using an MRI machine to scan the brains of kids aged 3 to 5 years old. The results? Truly shocking. Interactive screen time causes a loss of white matter in the brain.
Well, in the simplest terms, we could actually refer to it as some measure of brain impairment or brain damage.
Professor Mike Nagel from the University of the Sunshine Coast has spent a career studying child brain development.
So white matter in the brain is a material called myelin. So what myelin does is it wraps around the axons of neurons and acts like an insulator, a conductor, not too dissimilar to the plastic coating of a wire. So if we're seeing deficits in myelin production early in life, we're probably seeing deficits in neural connectivity.
The study shows the more screen time a child is exposed to, the greater the loss of white matter. Can you remember your first reaction to those results, not only as a professional in this field, but as a father?
My gut reaction was, wow, I was not anticipating seeing anything like that. It hadn't occurred to me at the time that something as little as, and it said 2 hours a day, was having such a profound effect on the white matter associated with sort of language development. And by association, literacy, it was a shock, to be honest.
He also believes big data backs it up. In 2010, smartphones became mainstream and affordable. Apps and social media exploded. So now we can track the impact. Psychological distress in our teenagers has skyrocketed. And look at the dates. It's all after the 2010 smartphone revolution. Mental illness through the roof. Hospitalizations for mental health, girls up 81%. Self-harm, huge increases for kids aged 10 to 12. The percentage of children sleeping less than 7 hours a night, look at that. All since 2010. The only graph that goes down, the time kids spend with their friends face to face.
Hello. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. It's great to finally see you.
Good to see you as well. Thanks for your patience.
Professor Hutton is a man in demand. It was his research that proved the link between screen time and the loss of white brain matter.
Yeah, I mean, it's really the elephant in the room. It's such a, to me, an obvious relationship.
John, what is your fear if we don't address it?
The fear is just losing a generation of kids, just kids growing up not meeting their potential, the continued rise in self-harm and body image disorder, anorexia, bulimia.
Smoking causes mouth cancer.
The professor believes screen time will be what smoking was to a previous generation.
For decades, we pretended like smoking, everyone kind of knew that it was probably harmful, but the industry pushed back and said, no, it's not. I think the same thing is going to come down the road for devices, but I think we are at risk of really having a lot of kids and a whole generation that's going to struggle unnecessarily.
As a parent, there are already more than enough dangers to navigate, but clearly screen time is something we need to pay attention to. So what should the guidelines be? How much of this is too much? In fact, is there any safe limit at all?
So what is the balance, Mike? What is the right balance?
Well, that's the $1 million question. There really isn't any necessity for a child from 0 to 8 to be using screens on a regular basis.
The advice from our experts: no devices in the bedroom, no devices at mealtime, that's adults included, no interactive screen time for any child up to the age of 5. For older kids up to 12, no more than 30 minutes a day. Limits for teenagers? Well, that's easier said than done, right? But fear not, there are more extreme options.
20 seconds, sir!
If they knew full well what they were in for, they got a bit of a rude shock.
Now, I'm quite sure that if you have children at home, or even teenagers, and some of you adults as well, who just looked at that video, will be saying, what? Half an hour? 1 hour? Nah! I'm quite sure that I have some of you all saying that. And you know why I am sure that you are saying that? It is because 99.99% of the people who use technology, that falls within that category. Because you'll find that the technology-based applications, the internet, the apps you download, the smartphones, the tablets, the interactive nature of the technology, it actually binds you to use the technology like that, okay? And now, what we know today, which is in 2026, you could not have known in 2010 or in the year 2000 because the technology had to be introduced, it had to be used, and then it had to be on a mass scale. And then when you have a problem, they will then come up with a solution for that problem. And with that solution, they will have change. And based on that change, and based on the research, they will then identify where the other problems are, and we have to find a solution, and then there will be change as well. So that is generally the concept and the idea of when it comes to technology and screen. Now, I have other content prepared that will basically tell you how to curb the excess use of screen. So when it comes to, for example, we're not talking about adults now. We're not talking about people in the working world. We're talking about children under the age of 18, okay? So that means you're talking about primary school, secondary school, even higher education, maybe first year or second year university. When we're talking about using the technology, an average child going to school from, let's say, 8 to 3 o'clock, they have 1 hour lunch, as the case may be, they might have 2 breaks. So let's just say, for argument's sake, 4 hours for the day of being in front of a computer. So we're talking about removing book bags, using a computer to do all the schoolwork. What's going to happen is that that child is going to be glued on to the technology. Now we're going to talk about pluses, we're going to talk about minuses in our next program. But the problem, and I'm going to talk about some of the small problems, one, excessive use of any type of artificial screen, television, tablet, phone, laptop, desktop. What it does, you have artificial blue light entering into your eyes. If you saw in some of those videos, children hold their phones like this, meaning a short distance from their face, as opposed to holding it at a particular safe distance with a laptop or a television. So your television, you might sit between 5 to 10 feet away, depending on the size of the television. And when you use these devices, or you stay at light for a certain amount of time, what happens? It creates eye strain. That excessive light focus into your eyes will cause retina burn, which the optician will tell you about. You have weakening muscles into the eye, which means that you're going to have watery eyes, you're going to have tired eyes. You might have to do, like me, get glasses. So there's a lot of things with regards to the screen. But what we're going to do, though, we're going to touch on those aspects of it in our next program. We are out of time already, so until I see you again next week, Thursday, on part 2 of this series, I am Dr. Shahanshah Ali Qasim, wishing you once again a productive week. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
50 winners have already claimed their shopping sprees at the Sads, the Food King and Brightside This.